So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, both here in the room and online. For those of you who don't yet know me, my name's Karen Alexander. I'm an assistant professor here at Heriot-Watt University, as well as on the board of OREF. And I'm delighted tonight to introduce two speakers who were previously directly engaged with Heriot-Watt University, both of whom undertook the Masters in Marine Renewable Energy, for which I'm the Programme Director. Duncan Munro studied mechanical with aeronautical engineering at the University of Glasgow, during which time he developed an interest in renewable energy. He liked the idea of studying in a small campus with close ties to the industry. And Parker Hansen is originally from Minnesota and came to Scotland to do an undergraduate degree in sustainable development at the University of St Andrews. He came to Orkney because he wanted to get involved with projects which make a big impact against climate change. Both have gone on to become some of the first energy transition accelerators with X Academy, which I believe we'll hear more about soon, working closely with the environmental team at Xodus. Tonight, Duncan and Parker will be presenting a study that they've undertaken focusing on the supply chain for renewable projects in Orkney, focusing on the challenges and opportunities for local business, particularly in relation to the workforce for upcoming large projects. And this will be followed by a panel discussion with local business leaders. So, over to you, Duncan and Parker.
All right, thank you, Karen, for the introduction. So we are actually going to have our introduction from Matt, who is online, who will give a little description about what X Academy is and the work that we're doing.
Hi everyone, thank you very much for allowing X Academy to come in and present this evening. Thanks to Parker and Duncan, who are certainly going to do most of the work tonight. But yeah, I'm Matt Jacobs. I'm the VP of Operations and Partnerships with X Academy. So yeah, just wanted to do a brief introduction to X Academy. So we are an energy jobs accelerator, and our absolute focus is on partnering to deliver the energy jobs and the inclusive employment that we see and that we believe the energy industry needs. So win-win-win. So our value really comes through partnerships. We were launched in Aberdeen in January of 2022. We are a not-for-profit subsidiary of Xodus, who obviously have an office in Stromness. But actually, upon launch, we were supported by the Scottish Government, so the North East Economic Recovery and Skills Fund. So we had public backing. But also at that time, we were entered a 5-year partnership with Morven. So that's the ScotWind joint venture between BP and EnBW. And the partnership with that organisation in particular was all around their commitment to people, skills and jobs in Scotland as part of their ScotWind bid. So yeah, absolutely, the way in which we operate is all about partnerships and working with public and private organisations. In terms of delivery, so Parker and Duncan and others in Aberdeen are all employed into X Academy on a 2-year programme. So throughout that 2 years, all their activities are, well, they're very much strategic and results focused and very much focused on gaining professional experience in the renewable sector. Now that could be, CCUS, hydrogen, offshore wind, and so on, where we really do work across various different renewable energy disciplines and enable them to gain experience in different areas as well. And alongside, the main element of that experience is on-the-job learning. So it's very much working alongside either experienced people within Xodus, which I think Parker and Duncan touched on, but also other organisations, which taps into that partnerships element. So we work with a number of companies on secondment and placements, which obviously provides excellent professional experience for the individuals within X Academy, but also it provides, essentially a talented resource for those companies and those organisations to actually drive forward their business objectives. And everything we're doing within X Academy is very much around pace. It says there, our focus is absolutely to accelerate the creation of energy jobs. We're creating jobs now, but needless to say, there's an element of pace around getting renewable energy projects up and running, and really starting to deliver on net zero targets and climate goals. So that's fundamentally what the PACE element of Xcademy is all around. So with that, I hope that's been a good short introduction. I'm really happy to stay on the call, stay on the meeting, and support Parker and Duncan towards the end with any questions.
So, as people interested in the renewable energy field here at Orkney, we can definitely see that we're looking at kind of two futures. One of immense growth and opportunity and all of these huge projects and opportunities for jobs and energy production. And another where, with our financial situation and the struggles for workforce, we're missing opportunities. We are lacking the people that we need to get these projects done. We're lacking the money that we need to get these projects done. What we wanted to do in this project was understand what we need to do in order to fully achieve the first vision of achieving everything we can for Orkney and Orkney benefiting from all of these projects that are going on around us. So we'll start off looking at the first future. What's that one based on? So in Scotland, we have goals for onshore wind, offshore wind, hydrogen, and wave and tidal to develop huge amounts over the next, we're looking at until 2030, so over the next 6-7 years. They're all doubling or even quadrupling in the amount from the amount that we currently have. It's a lot of effort. It's going to take a huge amount of development, particularly in construction. We also have, so looking at it overall, we're looking at an additional 20 gigawatts of renewable energy on top of the only 13 point something that we have at the moment in Scotland. That's more than doubling it, and that's just by 2030. That's not even by 2045 for reaching net zero. And then the government is expected that just in Scotland, we're going to have up to 82,000 energy sector jobs, which is like, well, what is it? It's a significant growth from what we currently have. Can't remember what the number is exactly. So what we did in Xcademy is looking at this gap between the future of these energy projects and the targets that the government is setting, and our workforce and who there is available and how many jobs are expected to happen in what region. Xcademy put together a white paper called Seizing the Energy Jobs Opportunity. And this research focused on aggregating over 70 workforce forecasts covering the entire UK. From this, we got the main takeaway was this graph here, that colorful one here saying this is our current amount of jobs in these various sectors, and it's going to grow 22% by 2030 is the median. And like 22%, that's a lot, but it's actually even more change than that, because we're seeing the oil and gas jobs decreasing significantly in this hot pink, and same with the nuclear jobs decreasing here. So it's even more, possibly double the 22% change. Other takeaways we found were that the energy sector is significantly lacking in gender diversity and other diversity, struggling to gather new employees. It's having a bit of an aging workforce. And we struggled through looking at these reports to see where these jobs are going to be generated. Maybe in some of them were they even saying, this is going to be Scotland, this is going to be England. There's nothing more granular than that. So that's what we wanted to look at in Orkney. So we have all of these big projects coming along. I'm not really looking at them. From the west of Orkney wind farm, the Ayr offshore wind farm, the Flotta Future Fuels Hub, this new connection to the mainland, other connections, cables, wave and tidal projects, and harbours projects happening in Orkney. We looked at we aggregated the different socioeconomic predictions that they had for jobs and local spend and their workforce development programs, and found that while each of them looked at their own project, they didn't look at it overall. And overall, between 2024 and 2030, we're looking at 5,900 total job years. So averaged out, that's about 1,000 jobs per year, but peaking in 2028 at 1,600 jobs in Orkney, We don't have all those people probably, but it's extreme in 2028. That's when we're getting the most construction jobs. After that, it starts to level out. We're still going to have construction in Flata if that ends up going forward, and then maintenance jobs hover around in the hundreds, but not in the thousands anymore. Each of these different ones has a different workforce development program, but they're not working together. We have some with internships, some with apprenticeships, some with investment into education, others with investment into research. So we'll want to understand how they can all work together. And yes. So with all of that, where are we going to get these people? In Orkney, we have a declining aging population. We have currently, when looking at the census data from 2001 and 2021, we can see that Orkney's population is progressively getting older, with fewer young people coming to the islands, showing that the workforce in Orkney is aging. Unless a change is made, then Orkney's capabilities will decline in the future. This decline can be seen in the future projection to 2028, where it shows a decline in Orkney's working age population, which will negatively impact the various projects due to be happening unless a change is made. Additionally, according to the UK government, this winter, Orkney is the third lowest county in the entire UK for unemployment. Only 1.9% of people are looking for jobs. If you multiply that across our population, that's less than 500 people looking for jobs in Orkney when we're looking to hire hundreds and hundreds of people. Where are we going to get all those people is the question. We're going to need to be attracting them in. We're going to need to find ways for the energy industry to grow, and we're going to need to find ways to attract people from outside of Orkney. So what are we going to do? We're not starting from nothing. We do have some studies done within Orkney, some groups done with groups that already exist within Orkney, and groups within the wider Scotland that are able to support the supply chain for marine renewables and support the workforce development. We have had a study last summer commissioned by the council, done by Giraffe Consulting, which looked at the possibility of creating a trade body for renewables related companies within Orkney. We have things like OREF to meet and discuss ideas. We have a directory which is available online, but I don't think widely publicized, of all marine renewable or marine related companies within Orkney. We have Deep Wind, which is set up in the northeast coast and is there to provide acceleration to all sorts of companies that support floating offshore wind started, but it's grown to encompass all of Scotland, and there's more clusters cropping up. So these bring companies together and are able to communicate then with developers to try and figure out how to get the best local benefit out of the projects that are being created. But there's also, not just in our sector, there is a strong history in Orkney of support for local businesses. We have various sector supply chain groups, such as the ones for art and tourism and food and drink. And then we also have the Orkney Business Forum, which has been working on bringing businesses together and seeing what needs to be changed within the business community. So looking at all of that background, we wanted to have a survey which would go off of seeing how does this national context relate to what's in Orkney? What's the differences? What's similar? What are the challenges and opportunities seen by local businesses? What is our population seen as, what are our businesses seen the next 5-10 years looking like financially and staff-wise? And what support do they feel they need from each other, from government, and from developers? I'll now hand over to Duncan, who will explain our methodology and the survey results.
So first of all, going into the methodology of how we did our survey. So we opened our survey in early January of this year, and it was sent out to various companies within the renewable energy sector in Orkney. This consisted of about 21 questions, which were a mix between multiple choice and open-ended questions, and just wanted to say a big thank you to all the companies that responded to this. We're now going to move on to looking at the results of this survey. So the first thing that we wanted to look at was the location of where these businesses are working. So we look on the data on the right and the location of headquarters. We can see that from the companies surveyed, almost all of them were based in Orkney, were headquartered in Orkney, And when we pair this with the one in the bottom right, we can see that over half of them are operating in offices out with Orkney as well as operating in Orkney. We also wanted to look at the year that the offices were founded, and if we look at this one on the top right, we can see that there's been a growth leading up to the period of 2010 to 2020, with this being the highest period of growth for offices in Orkney. And now looking at this map, we can see that the global presence that Orkney has within the world, as these are all the location, as the offices within Orkney all operated in pretty much every single continent within the world. And this shows just how much of the impact that Orkney has on the greater community. So the workforce overview. So this was important to consider when we were looking at the size of companies. We've surveyed in Orkney. We can see from the graph here on the left the size of the workforce, that they range from a few employees to large companies, with the majority of the businesses operating in Orkney being classed as small businesses, which is under 49 employees. The location of the workforce here is important, as we can see from the graph on the right. For over half of the companies surveyed, the majority of their workforce was based in Orkney. And when remembering back to the population of Orkney and the predictions for growth, if Orkney wants to continue to grow while having the workforce within Orkney, a change needs to be made to ensure that this can happen. So we then investigated into the trends within the workforce, and we can see from the chart on the top that there are a few companies with new employees, and which means that there's few companies with employees at the beginning of their career. And this shows that there are fewer younger people coming into Orkney and working in the energy industry, which is linking up with the population decline that we saw from earlier. And the companies, however, from this graph, the bottom one, seem to have good retention of employees, with the majority having people worked for them for over 5 years. We then wanted to investigate into the revenue that these companies were generating, and they will show first how large these companies are, as almost half of them were operating at more than £5 million in the last year. And this is especially important when we look at the percentage graph of renewable related revenue that shows that this is especially important when remembering the amount of revenue that renewables are contributing to all of these businesses. And for at least half of the companies surveyed, the renewable projects contributed to over half of their revenue. And this really highlights the importance that the renewable industry has for Orkney businesses, and how much these upcoming projects can benefit the businesses around Orkney. So we wanted to then look to the future and also gauge to see. So from this graph on the left, we can show that the current amount of renewable related projects that companies are working on is large, with very few companies working either none or one project, with almost all companies working on multiple, with over half of them working on more than 6 projects at once, which again highlights how important these renewable projects are for Orkney. And when we look to the graph, the pie chart on the right, we can see that for how much growth companies are predicting, we can see that almost all of them are predicting a reasonable amount of growth, with some having the renewable related projects being the main driver of their business. This is why it's really important that for the businesses that these renewable projects happen, and for that to happen we need to ensure that the workforce is there to manage it. So here we wanted to compare the current data for last year's new employees and company size, and we can see that this shows that the companies who grew by the most employees, unsurprisingly, were the largest companies with over 50 employees, while those companies who grew by the smallest amount were these smaller companies. And this is to be expected, but when we look to the predicted growth in the upcoming years of projects happening, we can see we need hundreds of new employees coming in a year. So currently, if we continued at the rate that we're going, Orkney might be able to cope with one or two of the large-scale projects happening, but not the multitudes that we have seen, along with the predicted decline in the working population. So this highlights that there does need to be a drastic change made to ensure that the growth is allowed to happen. And it's important to note and remember that not all the companies that are going to be working on these projects will be based in Orkney, but it is important for the Orkney supply chain that is able to maximise its benefit from these projects by having that workforce there. So the final thing that we were assessing in our survey was to see what sort of things might benefit the supply chain in relation to the workforce. And from the top graph, we can see from the ones in green that there are 3 areas that take the lead, with more council/government funding, upskilling the workforce being joint top, and it's important to note that while housing was the 3rd, this is an issue that is across every sector in Orkney and not just the renewable-related businesses. Along with what might benefit the supply chain, we also wanted to uncover some of the key challenge areas that are being expected by the businesses. And as we can see, the top ones in green, housing was right up there again, which just highlights the importance of this. But the other top challenge area was workforce. And this is one of the keys to helping Orkney to unlock the potential benefits that all these projects have. And from the information that we've seen already in these 2 graphs, we can see that there is clearly a desire for the supply chain to grow and a need for support with growing and the workforce, as this needs to be solved before the projects can happen. So when looking back at the survey conducted, we can see that there are 4 main barriers for the supply chain, but each of these has an opportunity associated with them that needs to be utilised. The first barrier was attracting new talent, and this can be seen from the predicted decline in the young population of Orkney, and along with the low number of new employees coming in from companies, and it is highlighted again by being one of the key challenge areas. There are many opportunities that are associated with this, as if the barrier can be overcome, all these large-scale projects will be able to happen and Orkney will be able to benefit. This is the opportunity that X Academy is hoping to play its part in by enabling people to transition to jobs within the energy sector. Along with attracting new talent, there's the barrier of the retirement of the experienced workforce, and this is a huge opportunity associated with it, as especially with Orkney being such a close-knit community and having outlets such as OREF, there's big opportunities to pass on this knowledge and the new workforce coming in, as it is important to not lose the vast wealth of knowledge that these employees have. The next barrier is business understanding and readiness for what is coming, and this could be overcome by working closer with the developers to help fully maximise Orkney's potential and helping Orkney to fully benefit from the projects. And the final barrier that we identified was the housing availability, but again, this is something that is wider than just the renewable energy supply chain, and it's also something that both Parker and myself experienced as new employees coming in to this. So our business recommendations that we had, so following on from our presentation, we're going to be publishing the results from both the survey and the discussions that are going to be happening into a report that will be publicly available. But our main business recommendation is for the future. The main recommendations for the future of Orkney's supply chain is to work towards addressing the issues that we've uncovered in this study, look into other ways of diversifying the workforce, learn from other locations and expertise to help the supply chain in Orkney grow, and look into ways to work closely with developers to maximise Orkney's benefit. We're now going to move on to the panel discussion section of our presentation. So if I could ask Gareth Davies from Aquaterra, Neil Commode from EMEC, and Liz Fubister to crack on.
Before you start, I think we should say that was a great presentation. Yeah. No, it was a great presentation. I think the study you've done it's great to get all the companies involved, and I think this is just moving on from where we've been to in the past, and great to get some new data. So yeah, absolutely. I think.
Yeah, completely agree with that. Yeah. Good bit of work.
So we've got a couple of questions. So based on your experience and considering some of the findings presented, what do you see as priority key actions for local companies interested in pursuing opportunities within the renewable industry?
Where do you start?
Yeah, it's a very big question. Let me start from the point of view that virtually, well, every Orkney company is really well positioned to exploit that opportunity. So we need to remember that we've done really well to get to where we are, and with the opportunities that you've just shown, yeah, it's a really exciting time. One of the things there's two things that I quite often say, because then I can remember what I say when I answer questions like this. One is, we've never been better prepared than we are today for what's to come, because we learned yesterday, last week, last month, which has given us the experience to make best use of tomorrow. But another phrase that I use is that I feel at the moment Orkney has a crisis of opportunity. And you've touched on a little bit of that in terms of the workforce dynamics. And that's obviously a critical part of it. But I think the reason I would say that is that I think the opportunities have never been greater. But at the same time, the competition and the prospect that Orkney may lose all of those opportunities has never been greater as well. So why is that? So a lot of the businesses that you outlined there were established, as you showed in your graphs, in the 2000s. And those businesses have grown up through a period where Orkney wasn't on people's radar, frankly. And the experience that we've all shared has put Orkney onto the map. So now, if you go and speak to any corporate business in the world, perhaps, they might well have heard of Orkney, whereas 20 years ago they hadn't heard of Orkney. So in the business that we have to compete for tomorrow and next week and next month, we're not actually competing amongst ourselves. We're not even competing within Scotland. We're probably competing on a global level. And I'm not sure that we then have the mechanisms in place yet to provide the support to the supply chain that we've described. We've got fragility in there, even for some of the bigger companies. Operating in a remote location brings its challenges. So that's probably, for me, encapsulates it. I think we've got, never had a bigger opportunity for business, but are we actually ready and prepared to walk through the door that's in front of us?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair reflection, and I think maybe what makes that, I guess, not difficult, but every company will have a different type of opportunity, or it'll be a different size of an opportunity. We've got quite a range of company sizes, so I think some of those opportunities, some companies will just want a small slice of the pie that gives them a bit of a, for example, I know there's a local electrical company, they really want to be involved, but their core business is electrical work, and so they want to be involved, but they're never going to be able to compete on a bigger scale. So I think each of those companies that we've got locally, they need to work out where their place is going to be. I think some companies will maybe know what their place might be. I think other companies might need to have a significant change in strategy to maybe be able to realise what they want to realise. And that'll be driven by people within the companies, the workforce, their aspirations for workforce. So I think it's quite a conundrum, I think, on how we can all work together. I think there should be some companies that will naturally conglomerate together to go, right, okay, this is something we know we can work together on and we can realise that opportunity. But, and I think that needs everybody to be speaking to each other. We know that some of the developers, two of the close by ones, are really keen to engage with the supply chain anyway. So I think we've got to work out how is best to do that for Orkney that allows them to maximise opportunity for Orkney, but without us, I guess, proposing to them things that just might not be feasible, if you know what I mean. So I think there's a lot of challenges all round. So that's more challenges than solutions, but yeah.
Yeah, there's a number of pieces that come to mind, and I don't know if this is going to come out in a coherent order, so bear with me. One of the things I find interesting is that there's a real calibration error between Orkney and the rest of the world, it seems. Because if you listen to the news, everything's gloom, doom and despondency, and it's all going to hell in a handcart. But Orkney's different. It feels very different. We feel on the edge of a huge opportunity. And it's really difficult to get people to have a positive narrative on occasions. In as much as we can see the scale of what's going on, it's just others can't. Unfortunately, a lot of the others are the ones who have the control, either got the money that's going to need to be spent in some of these things to trigger this stuff. And trying to get people to recognise that Orkney is different and we are ahead of the game is a continuing and continuous challenge. So we need to set our own narrative and drive things on here in a way that's different. Because if we keep doing the same as everybody else, we'll end up in the middle of the pack with everybody else. If we do something different, we'll break out and we will start to move things in a direction that we think is important. But trying to do that when the contemporary narrative is there's no money, we can't do it, everything's really hard, is going to be difficult. But I do think we can make that happen because we can point to the successes we have had, successes we are having, and how different things are, and make the most of that. One of the things I think is most important in this space is that, as we've seen at EMEC, and indeed as the Council has shown through a variety of things, you have to get things in place ahead of need. So infrastructure. EMEC was created as a result of work by people here that really got that in the water long before it was needed. But that, once it was there, people came and used it. People would not have come and used a beach with nothing on it or no cables. It just doesn't work. You have to have the infrastructure ahead of need. I would argue the same thing happens with skills. You need skilled people to do the job right, rather than pick up the bits of the person who got it wrong and have a big setback. So you need to train people early. And what's the risk of training people early? Well, you pay for the training, but you've still got the people. When as soon as they are called upon to do a job, they are able to do that job, as opposed to, hang on a minute, I'll go and find some people who can do this thing. You have a group of people who are already good to go. And so I think there's a real opportunity to drive the training agenda ahead of need. Because at the worst you get is you end up with a good, well-trained workforce. Is that bad? So I think there's a need that we can actually realise what we need to do and get on with it. And one other piece I think that was really picked up very clearly was this piece about housing. It is absolutely fundamental to what's needed at the moment. And we've got to build houses. We've got to, we've got to build accommodation. Personally, I don't think will all be houses. There needs to be flats, study activity, study bedroom type stuff, whatever. There's a range of stuff needed, not just 3 and 4 bedroom stuff that we are generally building. And unfortunately, I think the present housing strategy that's out there at the moment in consultation doesn't pick up the points that are made here. It basically skates over them and says there'll be a bit of population growth, and by the way, we're just talking to all the people with their projects separately. Well, separately doesn't work. It needs to be plan-driven process, and I think we're missing a trick with that. I said it wasn't coherent.
That sounded fairly coherent. So I've got another question for the panelists, and meanwhile think of your questions because we want to hear from the audience as well. So our questions for these guys is, in your experience, have these challenges always been there associated with historical energy activity in the region? And if not, what has changed recently in relation to renewables or whatever that has brought about the challenges that are specifically happening now?
So, go back to one of my previous answers, I think was, I think the challenges are bigger now and more consequential than they've been. Part of that is, I think the C word, the COVID times put a pressure on business that many businesses were able to survive, but they've probably drawn down some reserves to do that, and therefore their resilience to any future challenges is reduced, and perhaps the ability to invest is also reduced. And I think the other thing, and not to disagree with Neil, because I think as people know, I think Orkney is a fantastic place and we've got a lot of really good things going here. But we also have some real challenges, and particularly in Stromness at the moment, our social fabric. Any of you that are Stromnesians know exactly what I'm talking about. It's really, really difficult to live here at the moment because the hotel closure situation, we don't have places to socialise, we can't go out and eat, we can't entertain people. You know, we used to be famous, literally, globally, for bringing people to Stromness and showing them a good time. It may be hard for you to believe some of it, but that's what we did. But now, for most of the winter, we've got nowhere to take people to eat, and it's a disaster. And the repercussions of that come to students that maybe come here and don't have such a good experience, so they don't tell their friends and family about coming. So there's stuff there which, you know, many of us experience. I think the point that Neil made as well about, it's almost about how we invest in the opportunity. And you know, when we started off, everybody was scrabbling around to do what they could, and we did really well with that. But to land some of the opportunities that we need to see before us now, bigger projects mean more investment. And just at the moment, as a for instance, there's a project being tendered. I think there's 3 people that are interested in doing the job. None of them are from Orkney because it's a big job. So they're going around to all the supply chains saying, could you help us? And the tender requires the tenderers to kind of partly redesign the project before they put the price in. It's one of those jobs where you design what you're going to build. So what that's pushing down to the supply chain is lots of requests for, oh, could you do this? Could you do that? It's for a tender. We're not going to pay you, but if we win the job, you know, you might get paid then. So that puts extra pressure on the supply chain because they're having to do more work for free on the prospect of maybe getting involved in a job later. So that kind of, it's almost an unintended consequence of procurement. And we'll maybe go on to procurement later on, but that not just in Orkney, procurement is a mess generally in the world. And at the moment, it's not serving Orkney particularly well, I think. So that's some of the extra challenges I see.
Shall I jump in?
Yeah, I think the challenges we've had in the future have actually reflected the type of industry in the past. Challenges we've had in the past have reflected the type of industry we've been working within. We've been working within an innovative industry, a developing wave and tidal industry, quite, you know, a new industry. So in that, you're naturally going to learn things. So I think we've learned a lot. You know, we've done lessons learned studies on what we have learned over that, and I think that shows that we're great. I think the fact that you mentioned about scale, I think that is the big difference going forward. And I think just to be able to, everything that's been done to date within Orkney is relatively small scale compared to these offshore wind farms that we've got. And I think that is, it, you know, your study demonstrates we need to scale up the workforce. That's not easy for various reasons, whether it be local infrastructure, housing, the ability to attract people here. So I feel in the strategy going forward, we need to be realistic in what we actually can achieve locally and what local businesses can achieve, and I think how they might achieve it as well. You know, I think there'll be as I said earlier, there'll be very different aspirations between different companies. So I think it's about people using their experiences from the past to work out where they go forward. I think then we need to work out how much of this big opportunity we can actually, you know, there's been nothing worse than trying to go beyond what we're actually physically able to achieve and then getting nothing. You know, so I think I don't think it's an easy conundrum at all, and it will be very different for different companies. And I feel companies either need to get together to work out how they can maximize opportunities. I mean, I'm going to speak from personal experience. We became part of a larger company, and you know, there's no way we would have been working on the West of Orkney wind farm. There's no way we could actually meet a lot of the procurement stuff that you've just talked about without us being part of a bigger company.
Yeah. So the question was, have these things always been here, or are they challenged? So there's 2 pieces that come to mind. In the past, different parts of the public sector had more money to spend on various things. And so, for example, going back to the EMEC example, there was a lot of support from High to get Hansen Enterprise to get EMEC up and operational. Their budgets have been completely emasculated, and as a result of that, they have no money. And a case in point was, you mentioned the draft study that was put up there that was commissioned by High, which recommended that it would be a good idea if there was more activity going on to help drive the supply chain or support the supply chain in Orkney. And that was a recommendation that was then put forward and was then discussed widely. There was a meeting that was held in the Kirkwall Hotel, and the general supply chain said, yeah, that's a really good idea. Orkney's Council voted on it and voted money for pulling something together. And then High found they don't have the money to come up with the other half. So the supply chain side of things is not progressing. Now, in the past, so is that different? So the money is different. The outcome is the same, in that we didn't used to have a strong voice for arguing for the county for renewables, and we still don't. If we're not careful, we won't in a minute. And I think that's pretty much a crying shame. In terms of the other bits of similarity, I'm going to give you some homework, which is last week Howie Firth gave a really good presentation, which Mike very kindly videoed through Orkney Heritage Society, and Karen was there and some others were there, which was about the 1974 Orkney Act. And that was an act that was a private member's bill that was put through Parliament to basically help Orkney be ready for the opportunity, threat, onslaught, whatever you choose to call it, of oil coming and flotter and all the rest of it. And the reason I want to direct you to it is it's going to be up on the Orkney Heritage Society website very soon. And it's a really good explanation of the drive that was shown by a small group of people, both elected members and also the MP and also the officers, who actually changed the weather in Orkney effectively by standing up to big business and standing up to political pressure, and actually have generated massive benefit for the community. And I really, really urge you to see it. You're going to keep getting emails about it. Watch the damn thing, because we all ought to know from our history, know our history. So, is that the same? I think it is. The coming of oil and the impact that that had on the community is going to be comparable to, if not maybe slightly smaller than, the impact that we're going to see from renewables on the community. And at that point, Orkney got its act together and organised itself and made the most of it. At the moment, I'm not seeing we're organising ourselves, and we are not going to make the most of it unless we get our act together.
And just as an added bonus on that topic is that when oil came to Orkney, it was true that Orkney knew very little about the oil industry. You know, we had no track record in that sector, and we literally needed Stetson bearing, boot wearing Texans to come here and tell us all about it. You know, Orkney is the place where for the last 20 years we've practiced about renewables and even offshore wind, which people don't necessarily associate with Orkney. You know, Brian Rendell, for example, was one of the first people to get involved in the offshore wind industry anywhere in the world. So we have a big heritage there that gives us, we're not starting from zero, we're starting from 50 points up on the ladder or whatever. So that's the scale of the opportunity.
And I don't think that recognition is generally there. I'll be brutally honest, I'm trying not to make eye contact with anybody at this point. It's really important that we realise that sometimes we do know stuff, and people need to listen to what we're saying rather than wait for a consultant to say it from outside.
Yeah. So what did we do back in those days that...
Martin's got his mitt up.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Take a quick. Martin, I think you got your hand up.
My question is going back to housing. We've got a couple of potentially very large projects coming to Orkney, which will need a lot of incoming labour, and they'll need to stay somewhere. But can we put them in a place where, when they're finished, we can repurpose the site that they've used? So my idea might be that we build a lot of 4-bedroom houses and put them all with ensuite bathrooms for every bedroom, and then let people run them as 4-bedroom shared homes for the construction workers. And then when they've gone, then they can provide homes for a family in Orkney. It's just one idea, but I'm thinking we need to think outside the box. We don't want to build a construction hotel with 100 or 200 beds, which when it's finished with, then gets demolished and taken away.
So can I just come in on that as a point? Because Martin, I think you're absolutely right, and that's one of the bits I was saying. I'm slightly disappointed with the. I've written housing strategy brackets weak comment on my pad, because at the moment the housing strategy basically says that the council will negotiate or discuss with each of the individual projects that are coming in. So there's no sense of coherence there that I saw. And I think that's a missed opportunity, because like Martin says, there are ways in which we can design for the future and have a temporary state which we can modify. And so in terms of construction workers, the university is crying out for study bedroom type accommodation, which is much closer to what you can pack construction workers in for a period of time. But we need to design it in the right way so that you can mod it later.
Yeah, so just to build on that, if you think about the difference between a 1-by-1 and a strategic process, the first up project, it's a competitive tender situation. The tenderer is faced with a challenge. Do I go and build 4-bedroom houses that are going to be passed on to the next generation when I'm finished in 2 years' time? Or do I try and buy up all the room lets I can, at £100 a night? And I've just been, yesterday I was in a discussion, the difference between that was something between £1 million and £11 million in terms of, the cost to the project. So any tenderer is going to be faced with that conundrum, because we're not telling them to do anything in particular. It's like, it's a freedom of choice. So the aspiration is there, as Martin said, in the logic, and it says, think about strategic housing options, but in a competitive tender situation, and come back to the sophistication of the procurement, will that project be let on price, and therefore is the pressure to do the cheapest thing, or will the tenderer get rewarded for that strategic thought and the extra cost that comes with it? And I think there's a lot of things that we may touch on, which have that theme to it.
So whose remit is it to? Is it the council's remit to their housing strategy? How do you? Because there's no actual legal way that you can.
No.
So I guess it has to be the local will.
But there can be. You can hypothecate certain areas for basically what amounts to a new town type approach, and then expect to put in all the infrastructure as it goes. And when one is creating a development site, the way it would work is that somebody would have the land, somebody would borrow ahead of need for the roads and sewers and bits and pieces, and then the people coming to use that site would then pay back that contribution. But it requires somebody to have be the controlling mind to have actually come up with the initiative. That's a strategic activity. So you either have like a housing development corporation, which is like what happens, say, Milton Keynes, or the council takes on that role, or somebody else does. But the dangerous thing is if we go and just let it loose to somebody outside the county who then continues to profit from that at a later date, and that wealth just keeps hemorrhaging. So it's about us needing to mobilise to take control of those situations.
Oh, sorry, my hand's up because I have a further comment. It's not another question. Basically, we ought to be building these houses now for projects that are starting in 2 years' time or 3 years' time. We can't afford, I think, to let these projects go and pinch all the accommodation they can possibly get, and then finish up alienating the tourism industry, because tourists can't get to Orkney. The accommodation providers are happy because they're full. But the other tourist businesses are not happy because they're not selling whatever they sell.
Yeah. Thanks, Neil. I'd maybe want to move the conversation on at some point, but I just want to add to this sort of housing issue, and I think you made a very interesting parallel with when oil came in the Orkney County Council Act, the Zetland County Council Act. And what happened, one of the key things that happened back then was it actually gave compulsory purchase powers to the local authority. It was principally used to buy land in Flota and to buy Sullen Voe as well. But it was heavy intervention in land markets because they knew what was coming down the line. Of course, that kind of intervention is just so out of fashion nowadays. But it does strike me that there is an analogous situation there. Because the one different thing is that Orkney and Shetland had the whip hand back then because Westminster was desperate for the tax revenues. There was a huge argument in Parliament actually about giving powers to Orkney and Shetland. Some people didn't want it to happen and really pushed back against it. But basically at the end of the day they were so desperate for the money that it was kind of, I'll let Orkney and Shetland have what they want. So if I've got to turn this into a question, if there were extraordinary powers in an act of Parliament, what would it be? What would you? So instead of just saying we've got a housing problem, if you had a magic wand to wave that came with an act of Parliament, what would you do?
So I think it's making better use of the mechanisms we've got already. We've got the Islands Act, for example, which I think has more bite than is used at the moment, and I think we need to hold the Scottish Government accountable for not using it in the way that it should be done. One of the things that could be done there is to actually bring home, if that's the right terminology, the assessment of islandness, because at the moment whether a project, a programme or an initiative is suitable for the islands is determined by people in Glasgow and Edinburgh, and they tell us what they think. And if there was ever anything that undermined the ethos of what an Islands Act was about, that to me is one thing that we could campaign for, and we should be banging on the door of Holyrood to make that happen. I think there's other things in terms of and I'll come back to procurement, because again, this is not it's not just public sector procurement, and Liz and I spend a lot of time on private sector procurement, and it's a horrible thing to give you an outcome that is sensible, particularly on the basis of sustainable development and all of those things. It just doesn't work. Most of the procurement rules that we're working with were invented in the 90s when the oil and gas industry came under real cost pressure, and there was an initiative, I think Sir Ian Wood, he was probably not Sir then, but it was Ian Wood initiated to look at providing a stronger contractual framework, and we've absorbed that into big renewables now, and that's one of the things that Liz is alluding to. It's very difficult for small businesses to compete in that marketplace where you have procurement that's set up in that way. Many of those principles have then fallen across to the public sector because it's seen as the best way to get the right price. But we need more than the right price. We need so much more than that. And so I think we need to look at the practice of procurement and start, the response we've had from some of particularly the West Orkney Wind guys have been really into this. They see the challenge of going down the pathway that they're probably on, and they're willing to come around and try and do something different. So, I think, as Liz said, coming together is really important. The supply chain thing, I think we've got some really good conversations that are happening here now. There's probably about 20 businesses that are already committed to that. We're edging towards probably having an entity that might be a kind of Orkney Wind Inc. Incorporated, which we could all collaborate under. So that's another thing we could do. I'll leave some other suggestions to others, but I think that's two things.
I think closely linked to procurement is contracting strategy. I think they're sort of almost one and the same, but it's not only the procurement rules, it's how contracts are let for projects as well. So, a lot of that, so for example, the West of Orkney Wind Farm, it's an operating company, but they actually then contract a lot to a big tier 1 contractor. So it's actually not necessarily the developers that we need to be speaking to, it's their supply chains. And I guess at the moment they're one removed from us. So yeah, I think the wand is allowing us to be able to work under the contracts, but then also knowing who our contracts are going to be with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm desperately trying to find the relevant piece in the Orkney Act, because there is a piece in here which is basically the last clause in one, and I'm not going to find it now, so I'll stop. But it basically gives the authority the power to do whatever it deems appropriate for the people of Orkney. So my point is, I'm not sure we need a magic wand. What we need to do is go to the library. So I think there are powers that are probably already there, which we can, I would suggest, probably use. That's one part, plus the Island Act. And in terms of the political position at the moment, yeah, you're absolutely right. That we have a different political position to that which we had in the past. But that just means we've got to behave slightly differently, and we will find a smart way to make the most of our authority. I'm not necessarily suggesting we'll go to Norway route, but nonetheless, that did get a certain amount of traction and attention. But I think we have to recognise we do have some agency here. Yeah. We can do stuff. To some extent, I was always told it's always better to adopt the Jesuit principle. It's a lot easier to seek forgiveness than it is to seek permission. To get out and do stuff and wait till you're stopped. So I would argue that our own confidence is one of the things that's holding us back.
So we've established we think this is one of the biggest changes since Flotta, probably the biggest. We've talked about the housing issue. We've talked about supply chain scaling. And I wonder whether we're going to see severe pressure on Penton and Firth ferries. We've got 1,000 contractors going to and fro, and nothing will turn people against the projects faster than not being able to get off the island. What other social and infrastructure things do we need to be preparing for now that we haven't thought of?
Well, I think we're in a fortunate part of the cycle at the moment, because the local planning process, the development plan, is in drafting at the moment. So thank goodness for that, because the worst would be that we put a plan out and then find 5 years later something big coming down the track. It would have been nice if we had been on this earlier. I come back to that old phrase about, if you want wood, the best time to have planted a tree was 30 years ago, the next best time is tomorrow. So we are where we are, so let's make the most of what's there. The thing is, I thought the study was really interesting because it showed that sort of peak of labour, and that's the first time I've really seen that quantification of the numbers of people likely to be coming, and that's what we need to be focusing on. That we've got to deal with a peak, and then it'll drop and it'll plateau, and it'll then end up at some sort of maintenance level. And seeing what those numbers look like will play into the same sort of demographic planning that the council's used to doing. How many schools do we need? How many doctor surgeries do we need? Where do you park this lot? What's the shopping space got to be like? Those are sorts of things that have been worked through in a lot of other places, and I'm sure it can be done. But we need to be focusing on that. Going back to the housing strategy, I'm still worried it's about growth of a few hundred people, or by the way, there'll be some others turning up, and the others could be 1,000. That's the thing that's I feel is at risk of disrupting us.
I wrote down workforce. Yeah, I think just how we not only house the workforce, but I guess just understanding. It's interesting when we did our socio-economic impact assessment, it's very much seen as an opportunity here, an opportunity to allow development of services that support workforce that comes in. But interestingly, quite often, some of the stakeholders involved see it very much as a negative impact. So, I think it's like we've definitely found that the rural communities want to really accelerate that opportunity for them. I know there are issues with workforce, construction, transient workforces that come in, but I think we actually have a way to be able to understand what those issues are now and manage them and just make it all work for the benefit.
Yeah, so you were obviously alluding to maybe something like a tunnel or some other mechanism for linking the islands, but I think
your words, not mine.
Yeah. But I think in addition to what the others have said, mobility to and from the islands is clearly something which, again, that's one of the changes after COVID times. Any of us that have been stuck on a plane going to Shetland to get to Aberdeen, whichever way you're going, will appreciate that things aren't the same as they used to be. And as Neil said, I think, making sure it comes ahead of time, because, if we end up becoming more isolated, which we are at the moment compared to what we used to be, that won't be as a positive experience for people as it was before. And what's interesting is actually one of the numbers that I don't think came out of what you were showing, but when in 1999 the Orkney population was 19,856 or something like that. So now we're at 22,410 or so, so we've grown by 2,000 people in the last 20 years. And from the work we've done and the discussions we've had, I think a major part of that, as well as the demographic piece, was the renewables sector, because if you look around the renewables cohort, probably 2/3 of those people have come to Orkney to live and work. So they've come with family and whatever. And there's about 400 people now working in the renewable sector, so perhaps 300 of those have come to Orkney. Multiply that by 2.5, whatever the metric is, you're up to 1,000 people. So I think the other interesting metric is that 1,000 workers. When we were looking in the heady days of Petton Firth, Orkney Waters, and what might happen in Wave and Tide, there was a figure of 1,000 people that came out of that. So I think somehow there's a robust, and that was for Orkney jobs. It wasn't the total people involved. That was for what you could expect Orkney to get a piece of. So the fact that we've grown our population by 2,000 in the last 20 years and survived, and we're talking about going, maybe another 2,000, 3,000 to provide 1,000 jobs, that doesn't seem impossible. And my only other observation is that in the wartime, I think we had 50,000 extra service people here. So nobody here is old enough to have been here at that time, but clearly Orkney did survive that, and it was a war. But you could argue that the climate challenge is as serious as the war. So.
Yeah.
I think it would just speak into this thing. Is that right? Is that
quite close? Yeah.
It's marvellous, isn't it?
Technology, Keith.
I'm a wee bit confused because I thought from the presentations that we've had, this was about what I would call salaried jobs coming into Orkney, and then the discussion seemed to degenerate into construction jobs. And to me, that seemed as two separate issues. And I think they should maybe be treated as separate issues as far as the likes of the council is concerned. Because if you're looking at, let's say, the salary jobs, you need to think about schools, the medical services, the whole infrastructure of the islands. Where if it's construction jobs, you don't have to think that long term. And it would seem to me to sort of split the two, but have the same discussion. And obviously there's lots of dangers that if you take people away from the construction industry into this new phase that we're going into, then who's going to build the houses? And you've got to watch that you don't alienate the Orkney population, because the housing waiting list, as far as I can remember, has been about 600 for the last 30 years, and there's still 600 people waiting for a house. So if you go and dedicate all those houses to a new industry, there's a lot of local people won't just thank you for that. So there's a lot of different dynamics in this whole issue, and I think the sooner the council and the interested parties get together and create a strategy, I think the better it will be for everybody.
So just speaking to that, Keith, I think you're absolutely right. And we have just referred glibly to jobs and not sort of sought to split those out. But the construction, there's two parts. There's construction activity and then there's the maintenance and operations activity. But the other piece is, and I'm sure the other guys will argue very strongly, there's also quite a lot of what you might call white collar jobs in this whole process. When are we going to stop using white collar? Because when nobody else wears a tie. I don't know how it goes in there. Anyway, with those jobs which are capable of being exported, or the output from those are able to be exported, but only if you've done it here first. So there's quite a cohort of activity that can go on there. So we do need to understand what the demographic is. How many people are going to be in overalls and how many people are going to be in offices type stuff. I get that bit. However, there's an underlying piece there as well, which is that I've lost my thread. The housing piece, that bit about the housing is absolutely right, but my point remains, which is about building ahead of need, which is the point that Martin was making, that we need to build the houses. Now, we know we need houses anyway, and we know we've got a lot of people coming. So we really need to get on with the housing. Now, there is a group that got together that had input to the housing strategy, and I don't know if Rachel were involved in it, but it was involved with the builders and various other groups getting together saying what we need to do for housing, and that's helped inform the housing strategy. But one of the bits that I was slightly surprised about, it said, and we need to attract another builder into the area to do building because the existing builders aren't building enough. You go, well, no, surely we just need to get the existing builders to build more. So I think there has been the gathering to try and discuss it, but once again, I think this lot has all been left off the equation. I think that's a mistake.
Yeah, and just to the 1,000 jobs I was thinking of were not just they were permanent jobs. I think the opportunity could lead to that level of permanent settlement. And the confidence I have in that is if we go back to what I explained about the 400 that we've created in the last 20 years, as you said yourself, that housing deficit has stayed the same whatever we've done. If we've increased our population by 2,000, we still actually have the same housing problem potentially. So I don't necessarily, I mean obviously there's clear pressures that come with more people, but I think the housing problem needs a housing solution. It's not just dependent on this prospect of new projects coming along.
I don't think I've got much more to add. I think the housing strategy needs to be all encompassing, which I think you've said already, and maybe now that this is going to be published and available, that's something that can be provided to the people who are doing the housing strategy, to just give them maybe some numbers that have come from a local survey. That might be useful.
Good point.
I've got a simple answer to this, surely, is you're looking in 4 years' time, you're going to have a peak of wanted skilled jobs here. Why don't these people who are doing this procurement put it into the kids that are already living here? You know, they're already living in houses. You know, put it into the education, get them trained. You know, you've got 4 years, pretty much a apprentice. You get that skilled labour already there.
I think that's a part of the solution, definitely, Chris. And I think reaching out into the population for STEM subjects and getting people equipped for whatever comes, be it wave tide, batteries, you know, whatever they're doing, there are certain skills that are needed. But I just don't think that's anywhere near enough, because there's such demographic pushes on so many sectors, that particularly the health sector, you know, the care sector, all these sectors are crying out for people. And we can't do anything about that other than make the sector as attractive as possible and attract people in and get them to choose to come and do this rather than do something else. I'm not suggesting a forced breeding program, because that wouldn't go down too well. So we're going to have to work within the envelope that's there. But I do worry that at the moment we are not being sufficiently attractive as an industry or in an area, simply because you can't find anywhere to live. And when you do go somewhere, you go down the street and can't get a bite to eat. I had a pot noodle tonight because the bloody Chinese was shut. You know, and that's your sole catering opportunity. So I think we've got to increase the attractiveness, and that involves across the whole range of stuff.
You know, most of the kids I see are working in takeaways. You know, why aren't they at college learning how to do electrical work, plumbing, mechanical? This is, you know, This is where they need to be.
I think that the other, there's two ends to this, because obviously the incentive for kids to do something different comes from, it's like the role model thing, isn't it? You know, if you see something happening in your community, you suddenly aspire to do it, and it's great to see some under 30s in the room that have kind of taken that pathway. But I think we also have to be clear that this industry is not going to be delivered by school leavers and even young graduates. This is technically probably one of the most difficult things that we've ever done as a society because of the conditions that are there. And it's happening at a time where the businesses that we're talking about there, one of the other metrics it could have been interesting to put is how long are your leaders from retirement? Because if we say there's 1,000 jobs, there's probably 100 of them are business leaders that are not going to be there in 5 years' time. So we've got to replace 100 people in Orkney in the next 5 years who are going to retire. That's not school. Then we've got to replace another, or add another 200 senior engineers, senior advisors, senior commercial people who are in their, heyday of their career, because they're the ones that are going to really drive the thing forward. Then you start to get to maybe 300 or 400 people that are technically competent, have got experience, but can add to that. And then you get the people that are the new graduates coming in, and another 200 or 300 people. So thinking about that whole demographic, and we need to recognise actually, and there's so much that's talked about for skills and apprenticeships and all the stuff at the bottom. But those people at the bottom of the ladder won't have a job if there's nobody at the top to create the business and pull them through. And that's something that I think we structurally fail to recognise at the moment. So there's no support mechanism, for those people in the last 10 years of their career who are actually, they're the ones that are going to create the legacy, or because they have a choice of either, sell the business, pass it on to the workforce, or just keep going until, whatever. So
I guess that's part of what X Academy is trying to do, because that the graph that was shown where you had all the colours, the white paper where it showed, some industries were going down, some were going up, as well as the overall increase in workforce. So I think there's actually a mix there, Gareth, you're totally right. And I think X Academy is trying to pull people across to those people who may, transit from different industries. It's succeeding to some point of time. A lot of our cohorts have been the younger end, but not all of them. There have been some that have come over from other industries. So we're trying hard to do that, and hopefully that can only get better and maybe even out that graph. But I mean, and I think a lot of the developers that are coming forward, west of Orkney they've supported STEM. They're supporting one employee equivalent across Highland and Orkney. So I think there is beginning to be things at those different levels, but we need to do more.
So a lot more to be. I'm taking a second bite at that. So I think you're absolutely right. And I wrote down in here about OREF passing knowledge on. That was a point you made in the talk, which is quite interesting, because I think we do that on a voluntary basis, but there's nothing systemic that I can see that's actually getting that to happen. So as one getting towards the end of careers, told to taper off, spare time, how is that knowledge being drained out and redeployed? And the answer is it isn't at the moment. I think Martin's got his hand up.
And Rachel's got one as well.
Can I ask a related question?
Can I just say that the issue that Neil raised with not being able to get a meal in Stromness is exactly for the same reason that other people are struggling, in that there aren't enough employees. It isn't a case that too many kids are working in takeaways. The takeaways can't get people to work in them because there aren't people in the market to do that kind of jobs. And the reason there aren't is that they haven't got accommodation. And I would suggest that the reason Stromness suffers worse than Kirkwall and St Margaret's Hope is that Stromness is the place where the students all want to go, and they've nicked the accommodation. Now that might be an unusual point of view, but that is something that ought to be looked at.
Yeah, I was going to ask back on the questions a couple of people have raised. What have you seen from working with developers lately are the biggest gaps in skills that are needed? You're mentioning a couple of different levels of engineers. I know we have X Academy for mostly recent graduates. We've had some mentions of plumbers and electricians. But from working with developers and people wanting to come here to do research, what are the really specific gaps that you're seeing?
So I would turn that round and say, and to use a word that James Stockton always used, what is the contribution that Orkney can most intelligently make to what's going on? And maybe this alludes to some of the other things. So, we can't do everything. We don't have a big metal bashing background in Orkney, so the stuff that's being done in Invergordon isn't necessarily the stuff that we're doing. Whereas like the maritime stuff, driving boats, manoeuvring boats, working on boats, that's an Orkney thing. We have a very big maritime workforce and a long tradition and very, very good skills at that. So that O&M, operations and maintenance task, and the installation part, I think, is something that Orkney could aspire to. The other thing that Liz and I represent, I guess, and Neil as well, I'm not leaving you out deliberately, but is
where's he going with
the
this?
knowledge-based sector.
Okay,
but we again, most of the jobs that we've created in Orkney are around using people's minds, not necessarily using their physical attributes to think through solutions. And because of all the challenges that are there for offshore wind, there is a huge market, and some of which we've managed to capture so far. But even now, if you look at the last 5 years, there's probably been £100 million spent on thinking about offshore wind, and in Orkney, it's a 1 or 2 percentage points of that we've managed to capture. So we could do a lot better with that. So there's 2 examples of where we can maybe target, but not necessarily looking for construction and things like that.
Thank you. I did just come to listen tonight, but and I'm really interested. I suppose my first question is, who are you trying not to make eye contact with, Neil?
I was trying to work that out as well.
Yeah, well, I think some of us probably could. But I suppose I would go back to what Neil said at the beginning, which really stayed with me, which was the bit about, everywhere else there's this sense of doom, gloom and despair. But actually Orkney's on the brink of something. And I suppose I was kind of hoping a conversation tonight that stayed in that on the brink optimism. It feels as though we've kind of taken on a flavour of something else, which maybe is a conversation that needs to be had. But I think an assumption that this data is not being collected and considered, and for people who don't know me, which hopefully is most people in the room, because I do try and keep my head down a wee bit, I'm one of the elected members. So, I sit in community council meetings with community councils where we actually have developers come speak, and we ask the questions: what's the workforce going to do? What's the short-term workforce increase going to be? How long is that going to last for? When are they going to go away? What's the sustaining workforce that's going to follow through? I can sit in community planning partnership meetings like I did this afternoon, where we can explore a number of issues around the fact that what can we do as a partnership. So this is everyone's responsibility, not just the council. I know it's the national pastime to bash the council in Orkney, and I get that. It's getting a bit boring, but I get it. So as a partnership, what can we do around apprenticeships and trainees? What's the commitment? What are the solutions that we can only actually find answers to if we work together? So I suppose I kind of put that invitation out here as well, that we can sit here and bash each other as much as we want, but actually that's not what we do in Orkney. What we do is we collectively get together. And I think the other thing around workforce is that, and I sit very much in the health and social care, so I experience day after day the pressures on the health and social care workforce and the demographics that if every single adult in the population went into the care profession by something like 2032, we would simply not have enough carers. So that fact that you hit a point, and we could talk for hours on funding, particularly around this time of year with budget setting and things, but everyone knows the position that we're in. So I suppose it's that bit about when we hit an issue that we know the normal solutions don't apply because the normal solutions aren't available. We have to find a different way of doing things, and we can only do that collectively as a community. So I think those queries you have about what are we doing about accommodation, because we can also sit in the council and have people say to us, don't over-industrialise the landscape of Orkney. So how do we find that balance where actually we can accommodate the people we need to accommodate in housing that's landscape appropriate, that we're not going to be left with derelict assets that people are going to be paying for year on year on year beyond that point? How do we create land where it's not just the council, because we can build a limited number and we can talk about the amount of grant money we get for building houses that is not sufficient considering the additional cost to build in island communities. We could speak about that for about another hour as well. But how do we provide land where we create the opportunities for private sector to build? How do we, as has been said, how do we build accommodation that's fit for purpose for the brief time it might be needed or for the longer time it's needed, and repurpose it in a way? How do we ensure that our health services have sufficient capacity to deal with the influx that may exist for a period of time? How do we manage our schools for the longer period of time? And how do we do that as a council in an environment of 10 plus years of austerity and the significant challenges we're facing at the moment? So we can only find that solution as a community together. And I think if we move beyond that conversation about whose fault it is, but actually collectively to get together, and those conversations I have in forum after forum after forum of people willingly giving their knowledge and their experience and their understanding of the crisis we face across a number of different areas, then I think as a community we can actually work together. And that's the conversation I would invite us all to have.
I don't think anybody would disagree with you there, Rachel. I think the point I was making was that I was disappointed that piece was missing from the list. Thinking is going on in these areas, but there was just a sort of a skip the paragraph type stuff. And you go, that can't be the right answer. There is work that needs to be done in order to understand this, and there was no evidence of that in that document. That's why I was drawing attention to it, because I think it's so important that we do have a strategy, and the community has to be brought into it. I think the sort of ideas that Martin was talking about with the repurposing side of things, once again, didn't see that in there, and it's. I completely agree. We need to have it. I certainly was not intending to knock the council. I'm saying that the High are in a position where they have no money anymore, so that's a problem. But we do need to have that engagement. So I'm really keen that we do that. That's why this discussion is useful. That's why. Yeah.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that it does exist that we can miss things, and I would be disappointed if that information hasn't fed in, because certainly I'm aware of the kind of degree of pressures that are going to come for certain periods of times, and those questions have been answered and we've been given answers on them. I can sit in a forum a couple of days ago where the housing didn't perhaps take into account sitting with a room full of people who provide third sector services to social care, saying, we have problems, we can't get workers because they've got nowhere to live. So this is a conversation that's had everywhere. And I think one thing we can do, which I think you're absolutely right about, is we need to be looking at what is it that we need to take to government to say, and we accept government struggling with money funding as well. We all accept that, but it's that collective conversation to have to say what are the levers that actually would make things possible for us to find the solutions we want to find. Yeah. And maybe that's around legislative issues, maybe that's around innovation that we can't do because there's certain limitations. That's a conversation we can have all together to say what do we need to change.
And while that mic's been handed back, Gareth's 3 points he keeps banging on about mandate, recognition and flexibility is about just that. We need to agree. This ain't Edinburgh. We've got a different set of things we need to do here, so we need the flexibility to do things differently, and recognising this is going to be a major growth area.
Are certain people not informed well enough yet? Is that?
Oh yeah.
Is that and how? So in terms of, if there's conversations that are going, is all the right information feeding into those conversations, or is there information that's maybe missing from? If you're saying these conversations are happening, is it what's not working at the moment?
Well, I'll chip in one piece. Going back. Once again, I'm major on the housing strategy. The housing strategy for the first time I've seen a significant document that actually mentions the growth in population as a function of renewables. I can't remember the last time that was in a document. I genuinely can't. We kept going on about it. What's going on here, guys? And it's been agriculture has been the big growth, and that's where we're going. Yeah, that's important. We get that, but renewables has come along, and that was certainly missing in a lot of documents. So it's permeated through the walls of School Place, which is great. Has it permeated all the way through St Andrew's House in Edinburgh? I don't know. I doubt it.
Just to kind of respond to something and trying to think about the positive side, I think one of the things that we could, as a community and across the community, recognise is that all of the stuff that's being talked about, actually whether it's in the social sector or the business sector, it requires investment. And I think that's something that across our community we could be much better at recognising how we invest at the moment as individuals and as organisations. And to evoke Howie's, always credit him with this, his idea about the Orkney Bank. And I think that this is a game changer for Orkney that is probably long overdue. I think it could have resolved and helped with a lot of the issues that we're facing today, and I think it could really be relevant in the future. Part of that's because of the way the banking system, apologies to any bankers that are in the room, but the way the banking system that's remote deals with us at the moment, it is terrible, particularly for business at the moment. And so if we want that to be different, and again, go back to the sustainability principles, if we want finance and investment to happen in a way which is live to the Orkney way of doing things, we have to influence that. We can't go to the Bank of Scotland or the Royal Bank of Scotland, whoever at HSBC, and expect them to adopt our way. And I think, we did some calculations, rough calculations, that indicated that Orkney probably has about £2 billion invested at the moment across its whole community. And there's a portion of that's invested in housing or locally or in initiatives, but most of it's invested off the island. And so if we thought about some of these initiatives, I can't remember who said, if you invest in the job, is it really bad to have too many trained people? And could you not say the same for housing? Is it really so bad to have too many houses instead of too little? If we had 20 too many or even 100 too many, what does that look like? And I just think if we could invest in housing, because that's what you do, you invest in a property and see a return on that, maybe that would be a way of dealing with it. So I think that's where it's going back to the word somebody used, confidence. I think we need collective confidence across all of our community to invest in our future. Because if we keep looking for other people to invest in our future, it isn't going to happen. And that's probably what's crippling us at the moment, and particularly in the SME. Liz was talking, quite rightly, about the difference between large and small businesses. One of the issues with a larger business is if you can get hold of it, you've got somebody that can invest in your local activity. But as an SME, that's really difficult to do. So that's where I think one of the areas where there might be a coming together. Could we invest more imaginatively in our collective future?
Yeah, I think completely agree. And one of the things that's very much, the community wealth building. So, for example, and I can't remember what meeting it was in. So, I can put forward a request that we actually tie in community wealth building to every single report that comes through council, and got support, so that actually becomes embedded in our thinking. Yeah. And it taps into what you were saying, Liz, about procurement. Having just sat into a number of workshops that were completely voluntary, but I have no better use of my time, so I do, across a whole load of aspects to do with community wealth building, to try and understand and learn what the opportunities would be and how you ensure that you build that wealth into the community through every single sector. Yeah. So yes, those conversations are being had, those kind of thinkings, embedding things in reports and trying to think about that change, to shift that change of thinking, to think, how do we do this? But there are challenges that I think, sometimes aren't always visible. You talked about COVID, you talk about the impact on that in construction industry, you talk about the increase in material costs, you talk about the fact that capital projects are now beyond the ability to be paid for by the original funds because the funds have gone up. You talk about the restriction on workforce within the construction industry. You can sit here for ages and look. So I would just hopefully, and I may be one of the elected members who's not overly intelligent, but we're all trying our best to try and work all of these things in. and to have those conversations, to take that information, and I think we're basically all saying the same thing, and that collectively we're trying to do the best. So.
Ali's trying to get in.
Yeah. Just well, that's good, Ali. Can I just also point out that on this community wealth building thing, ICIT, and Sandy's hiding behind there, but ICIT is Sandy leads as an economist by training, and we have had a centre which has been really interested in community wealth building, operating in Orkney for 30 years. And we don't shout about that enough, because there's lots of other people that are kind of jumping on the bandwagon and trying to sell us community wealth building through their eyes. But here, in this very institution, we've got 30 years of experience. So that's something that I think we could really, it adds fuel to what you're saying. If we can celebrate what's happening here and showcase that much more, instead of at times bringing people in from outside, and that's so I don't want to grab more time, but I think it's really important, and thank you and well done.
Ali was trying to make a point.
What I was going to say may already have been said mostly. Thanks to Rachel for being here, and she's probably talked very eloquently about most of what I may have said, but just reflecting on one or two of the words she used: collective confidence, and the balancing act that all this takes, because it's not just one isolated subject, it's a huge subject, everything's interrelated, there are so many sectors to consider. And I'll really look forward to seeing Howie's talk, because he'll have an insight from many years of things where we need to learn lessons from the past. It's not the same now, you can't do the same again, but you can build on those learned experiences of how the community's coped in the past. And thanks very much for the talk, and to the panel for their insightful comments too. And not to put too much pressure on you, but maybe we can use this talk as one of the new catalysts to help people's awareness of the importance of this situation. Somebody mentioned war there. People unite in adversity, and we've got a huge challenge, and maybe if that challenge is highlighted as being of critical importance, to the extent that we all do get together and discuss it as an emergency, as something that is critical to how we develop in the very near future. It's not something that's miles away. Yes, the government has funding problems, the local authority does, but the government needs to put its money where its mouth is. It's talked about tackling climate change. One of those things is the development of the renewables industry here, and the maintenance and sustainability of the community should be part of that. In the past, we capitalised on trying to, yes, serve the oil industry, but also there was a degree to which both Orkney and Shetland benefit from that, quite cleverly in some ways. You think of all the community halls in Shetland that came from that, and the way that we can build, as somebody said earlier, what we build as part of this initiative. There is a fear of sustaining something if it gets too big, but also if we can build the collective confidence of developing in a way that can then go on to be used cleverly, upcycling it for the future, if you want to use that word. So I think there's a great opportunity, and I would also say a word for continuing to listen to the community and keep listening to the community. There's a lot of wisdom in the many different sectors in the community, and cross learning of how things are done in different industries. And a united island approach would obviously be huge, but I think using this talk to advertise and build on that, what the emergency of the issue is, will maybe help people like Rachel to make the case within the authority of what maybe needs to come together and giving the fuel for the fire, I suppose.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Sandy's trying to. Okay.
I was sitting here and it just struck me about some of the companies that are here, UMEC, Xodus, Aquaterra, and you're in a building at Heriot Watson. None of these organisations actually have to be here. They were here because, I don't want to go into the history of it, but some people took some chances and some people, decided to go for it with their business or whatever, but they don't actually have to be here. Now, if there's oil in the ground, somebody will come and take it. There'll be some activity. Aquaculture needs sea space, so it will rock up and use your sea space. And to a certain extent, offshore wind's like that. Now, we can manage that badly, or we can do it well, but it's going to come. But what are the exciting things, the things that we, the extra things, the things that I suppose we stand to lose, or the opportunities to gain, the sort of icing on the cake. That industry is going to turn up. It needs Scapa flow. The whole industry is saying there isn't enough harbour area in Scotland, so it's going to happen. We might manage it bad or good, but what are those extra things? The stuff that we might lose that maybe doesn't have to be here, but we can maybe grab.
I think for me that it's a really good reminder of playing to our strengths and thinking about what are the unique things that we've got here, because we are here, and the reason we're here is because we all recognise that there's something special about Orkney, which maybe goes back to the positivity discussions. When you're trying to solve a problem, you can always focus on the challenge, but we wouldn't be here trying to challenge it if we didn't think that overall it was a really positive place to be and a really special place to be, etc., etc. So, I think my observation on that is that have we been through the golden age, if you like, of when Orkney had these organisations, and we're talking about the supply chain tonight. There's other things in society, but the golden age of small businesses in Orkney, is that what we've been through in the last 20 years, or is the golden age still to come? And you're right, and from a positive point of view, that's our destiny. We need to control that. We need to take charge of it and shape it, not just as I think, or Liz thinks, or Neil thinks, but as the whole community thinks, because that's why we're here, because we want to be part of a community. So, I think what the guys have done is illustrated a part of that, and all of us in all of our ways, we have conversations, yesterday, today and tomorrow that link in with that. And, kind of going back to the benefit of these events is that it never harms us to talk about the challenges and the relationships. You spoke brilliantly about the pressures and the challenges and the opportunities that you're having to deal with. And as Ali said, we need to give you and other people in your role, the evidence and the support so that you can make as good a decisions as possible. And part of today is about creating information that can be shared. And if we get a few positive, not vibes, but just we always learn through these conversations. I've spoken a lot, but I've learned a lot as well, even from the conversation we've had tonight. So, that's part of, I think.
I think that was where I was trying to come from earlier when I said, are we informed enough? Maybe we need to be sharing more. We need more information to share, I think, and so I think that's part of that whole community conversation. And I just keep coming back to that word confidence as well. I think actually that's really hit home with me tonight, and I hadn't really thought about that before, but we just have to have confidence to move forward. And I think I could be quite controversial here, but the council has to be quite confident in some of the decisions it's got to make as well. We may be, if Scapa Deepwater Quay goes ahead, does that generate, or any other facility, does that generate a bit of a galvanisation for things to happen here? If we don't have a big project like that does go ahead, then I actually think we potentially could lose, some of the opportunity that we would lose that particular opportunity, but I think it would actually have knock-on effects on, having some big facility here that is going to support this new offshore wind industry, I think will help us maximise our opportunity for the industry.
So maybe the it's tuning that to some of the questions that were coming back. You know, do we do everything?
Yeah.
Or do we need to be quite forensic about tuning it to our needs and the opportunities? And so it's not importing a piece of infrastructure that somebody else might have. It's about shaping it in the structure that makes it appropriate, whether it's housing that isn't a blight on the landscape, or whether it's support that's appropriate for the kind of services we're going to be providing, or whatever, transport links or
tunnel.
Tunnel.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to jump in. I was trying to keep my trap shut a bit because I've been talking too much. What's so special is, I think, was a piece of it. What's the spot called?
What's the icing on the cake that we should strive to get, the things that we wouldn't necessarily get unless we reach out for them as the industry, isn't it?
Yeah, I think nobody knows how to do a lot of this stuff at the moment. And if we learn how to do it before other people, that gives us a sticky product to keep selling to people later on. I think one of you said this at something else. We've been together too long on too many things here. I can't remember who said what. But if you go to any oil field anywhere in the world, there'll be somebody with an Aberdonian accent in the middle of it somewhere. And that's not because they particularly want to go to that remote place. It's just they're very good at what they're doing, and because they've learnt to be good and they've done it very well for a number of years. The same thing should really apply when it comes to wave and tidal at a later date somewhere in the world. Or alternatively, when they open up the file about how to do the thing over there, it's got, made in Orkney stamped on it. There's no reason why that couldn't be here. Ideas have to start somewhere, and they're like ripples and they go out. Well, we can start the ripple. It doesn't have to start somewhere else. You don't have to wait for permission to do this somewhere else. We can create this, but we have to do that with a degree of confidence, because if we're not confident, what will happen is we'll get predated. Our ideas will be taken and people will buy them out, or they'll disappear off, and the critical mass will never occur. So I think this is this bit about confidence and stepping forward, because the worst that happens is it gets an awful lot better. We end up with new, well-insulated houses, which means we can knock down some of the rubbish that we've got and replace it. We end up with educated people in an environment that's not emitting carbon. You go, yeah, well, I'll go for that.
Just another thought that came to mind, and it comes back to confidence, and it's actually a story about West Orkney Wind as an organisation, because as we know, that was created because of the imagination of just 3 individuals who actually were consultants in organisations, basically people the same as us, and they decided to get together to create Ridge, which was the vehicle that then led to West Orkney Wind. So they got backing from Macquarie or Corio and Total, but that was literally started by 3 guys deciding they wanted to be a part of the bidding company in wind. And that's another example of what we could do. We're talking a lot about how we react to developers and as though they're the aliens that are coming in, but we could be part of that cohort if we have the confidence and create the resource to do it. So next time, and there will be a next time, there's an offshore wind round, or if there is an opportunity perhaps to even go and knock on some doors and say, would you be interested in Orkney becoming a partner in this enterprise? That's a slightly different relationship to being the whatever. Anyhow, the relationship we have at the moment is as a service base, not necessarily as a co-developer. And I think that's something that might be a good idea for us to look at. And it kind of goes back a bit to, we've lived with Flotta for nearly 50 years now, and yet we've never had a shareholding in it. We've made a lot of money from it. But could we have made better decisions about Flotta's future if we'd had a shareholding in it? I think that might have been a useful opportunity.
Conscious of time, Karen, were you going to sum up? Because I've got a few parish notices stuff to do.
I didn't realise I was supposed to.
You don't have to. It is the opportunity if you'd like to, since you introduced. Did you want to say anything?
No, not really. I mean, I've got loads of things I'd love to say. Yeah, no, I've got loads of things I'd love to say, but it would end up the conversation continuing for another 2 hours, which I think would be a bit problematic. So I guess at this point, what I would really like to do is to thank our speakers, Parker and Duncan, who gave an excellent and very thought-provoking presentation, clearly with a lot of different avenues that have started to be discussed and probably will continue to be discussed for the foreseeable future. And I'd also very much like to thank our fabulous panel as well, who have again made some very thought-provoking comments throughout the discussion as well. And also to thank everybody here and online for their questions. So if I can just ask everybody to give everybody a round of applause, that would be fabulous.
So just a couple of little oh, sorry, we got what?
Oh, it's just a thumb.
Oh, just thumbs up. There we go. We're just trying to work out. Thanks, Matt. So just a couple of little parish notices, really. One, thanks for coming along tonight. If you're not already an OREF member, you're more than welcome to join. I've also got a slight confession to make that last month somebody came and said, oh, here's 10 quid for a membership. And I can't, oh, it was you gave it to me?
Yes.
Right, so who did you get it from? Because I can't remember. You just went, here's 10 quid. I went, what? So as some say, if you remember who it is, that'd be really, if it was your 10 quid, please remind Gareth. Okay, so that's about, so it's 10 quid for the first year, and if you want to join, you're more than welcome. We also have the next meeting will be this time next month, 9th there, and it's about, is it Phil?
It's Professor Phil Green from Heriot. He's going to be here in person. He's going to talk about the future of logistics in a low carbon world.
Okay, I'll just revoice that. That was Phil Greening's going to be here on the 9th of April, talking about greening logistics in a low carbon world. So that'll be really interesting. So thanks for that. Is that going to be here, or is that going to be at King Street Halls? Due to popular demand, we're not using St Magnus Centre because the acoustics are so terrible. So anyway, there we go. So there's that. And the other thing, just really draw people's attention to, on Thursday this week, SSEN have got a consultation event on at Firth Community Centre between 2 and 7, which is about the works around the Finstown substation and the associated bits and pieces going on with that. The community engagement side of things is ramping up on that. We've also offered them a slot to present at some stage, and we're hoping they're going to take us up on that later on in the year. So do get along, find out what's going on, make your voices heard, and just contribute to the discussion, please. I can't think of any other notices. So I'm staring at my oracle, which is Francis, who knows what's really going on. Anything else from anybody else? If not, it remains to me to say thanks very indeed for the technical crew for doing the recording on this lot. We really appreciate all the effort. They were here an hour early setting this lot up, and they'll be here after we've all gone. So that's really great. Thanks to you for coming along. Thanks for the openness of the debate and the discussion. And please do keep this going. It is a forum. It's here to discuss things. That's the objective. So please contribute in the manner in which we've done tonight. So thanks once again to everybody for the presentation. Thanks Parker and Duncan for an excellent piece of work. Wish you well in your careers. You've started off extremely well with this. Really good starting point. So thank you. So thank you and good night, everybody.